Howdy, howdy. Dylan with Huntsville Guns. Today we're working on the Savage 1907 project. This is a subscriber firearm that they sent in for diagnosis and potentially repair. This firearm had some previous damage from somebody trying to work on it. There's some metal damage that needs to be addressed. There's some missing components as well. And this morning I have the world's best cameraman helping me out. And we are going to try to do some different camera angles for y'all, a little more involved footage, and take a look at some of these components. If you will, sir, will you pan down here, please? So the main concerns with this firearm are the frame. The back of the frame, as you can see here, is fairly damaged. And I need to move a little bit of the damaged metal back into position where it came from originally, as well as on the rear of the slide. You can see the damage that is here around the edge where somebody took a hammer to it. I've cleaned this up a little bit so I can get the breech block back into the firearm, but I need to continue to address this. I'm starting to think that this may need some additional material added, as well as the damage on the top of the slide here. And then finally, we're going to look at the barrel. There is some damage to the muzzle here where it looks like the barrel has been constricted. And so we will set this up and clean the barrel out really good, and then probably cast with some Safe the front inch or two of this barrel up towards the muzzle, just to see if there is any constriction, and do some measurements to make sure that this is still viable to use. Like I said, we're gonna do a little bit of work. I've got an extra set of hands to run the camera this morning, so hopefully I can get you all some footage. We've also been looking through parts catalog, trying to determine what parts we need to get on order, and see if we can find some of the stuff that's missing on this gun to put it back together. Stick around. So we're going to start off with a barrel. The bore of this barrel is very dirty. You can barely make out the lands and the grooves. And so what I'm going to do is use a little bore cleaner. This is probably a 50-year-old can of gun scrubber. And so we'll put a bunch on a cotton swab and run that through the bore a few times. Let that start working on all of the carbon and fouling that's in the bore. Pretty satisfying sound. You can see that's very filthy inside. Now that we've got that soaked pretty good, make sure we get some in the chamber. We will take a copper bore brush. This one is slightly larger than .32 caliber, and give that a bunch of scrubbing. Again, this is an old firearm, and the bore is not necessarily in great shape anyways, and so normally on a precision firearm you wouldn't want to run the brush in both directions. You would start from the chamber end and pull through to the muzzle, but in this situation we're just determining if this bore is still salvageable. So we'll run this through a few times, clean out the lands and the grooves, and then we will take a clean cotton swab and push some of that dirt and funk and junk out of there. Really all we're doing, like I said, is trying to clean up the lands and the grooves, so that way when we cast the muzzle end of this barrel, we'll have a clean cast with not a bunch of debris in our Safe. Just make sure we get some accurate measurements. Looking at it, there is almost no lands and grooves left in this barrel. It's in pretty rough condition. So I'll scrub on this for a little bit more, trying to clean the majority of that junk out of there and bring you guys back in when I'm ready to cast it. Well, a little further investigation kind of led me to a couple of discoveries. Did a bunch of scrubbing on this bore, and I'll drop some footage in here, but basically the bore on this barrel is gone. There's almost zero distinction between the lands and the grooves. There's some pretty severe pitting. It looks like this spent the majority of its life firing corrosive ammo and was never cleaned after the fact. I'm a little worried that casting the muzzle end in Safe is not going to allow me to push the Safe back out. In my experience, casting chambers and casting a bore where there's this much pitting, the Safe tends to stick and then it won't be able to come back out. And so we are just going to chalk this one up as a loss. We'll add that to the list of parts that need to be replaced. Next, we're going to jump over to the frame. I am going to spend a little bit of time with a polished face hammer and try to remove some of the dents that are in this frame from previous damage. And once I get some of the dents out and I can get the sides flat, we will probably either put this in the hydraulic press or use the quill on the milling machine to try to bring these two flared sides back together. Let me change the camera setup and I will bring y'all back in. So I've got a piece of brass in the quill on the mill and a piece of sacrificial aluminum under the frame. And I'm applying a little bit of downward pressure with that piece of brass to see if we can compress these flared edges a little bit. We may have gone a bit too far with that guy, but we can always adjust. Trying to bring these back together without damaging the frame in the process any more than it already is, really. Both of those look better. I need to get you in the right light. I need to fix this one a little more and open it back up, but this one looks better. Okay, so with a little bit of careful work in the quill on the milling machine, I have the edges of the frame back in a line. If we use a straight edge, the edges of the frame, the rails, are in a line, but what you can see is that the rear section of the frame here and here are still flared out. And so what I need to do is make a block, a filler piece. We'll remove the slide from the frame and put a filler piece in here, and then re-roll these edges back into the position that they came from originally. And then I think we've got a pretty good jump on the frame. I still need to finish planishing some of the hammer dents here. Let me see if I can get a pointer. Some of these dents here need to be repaired, but I need to make sure that I don't remove any of the original factory markings in doing so. All of this frame is going to have to be refinished ultimately. There's enough damage that it justifies a refinish. But I think that the frame is going to be salvageable at this point. Let me do a little more work and see if I can bring y'all back in. Well, it appears as if I've lost my helper for the afternoon. Turns out that lunch is important. But I want to give you a summary. I think that we have arrived at the end of the project that is the Savage 1907. As you can see, I have the firearm able to be disassembled and reassembled to some extent. I have done a bit of metal work in order to get it to this state, but it is by no means a safe to fire firearm. You can see that it does in fact function somewhat. I can even get the firearm to fire, pseudo fire in some extent. There is definitely some damage to some internal components that would make this not one that I would shoot moving forward. I also have done a little bit of metal work on the rear here. You can see that I've got the sides back in line with where they need to be, but then the side of the frame rail definitely needs some additional work, and there is some rebluing that's going to have to happen. If you can see the back of the slide here, there's definitely some mushrooming and some damage still that would need to be addressed. So I am unfortunately going to have to very incredibly hard to get the slide to the rear. I'm going to have a conversation with the customer about the future of this one. I think, unfortunately, it is not a repair moving forward, and I'll give you my reasons why. So, parts that need to be replaced: ejector, grips, barrel, sear trip, most likely the sear as well as the slide. And then on top of that, that's $300 to $400 worth of parts alone. And then on top of that, you need metal work and a refinish to reblue all of the components to make them uniform color, things of that nature, fix some of the metal damage and make it look like it should. Somewhere in the tune of $400 to $600 in metal work and refinishing. So I am already well over $100 in the disassembly and inspect and diagnose. So I will, like I said, call the customer, have a conversation about this one either becoming a parts gun or a wall hanger at this point. It's not something that I would use moving forward. I definitely am very suspicious of the barrel. I hope you find this content enjoyable. This is a little bit different format than we've done in the past, kind of making a multi-part 2-video series for specific guns. It's difficult to film a lot of what I do. For one, I don't always have somebody to turn the camera on and make sure that everything looks good. But I also do this for a living, and it is usually much easier to just get the work done than set a tripod up and get the camera set up and point it in the right direction, film a couple of different takes, edit all of that material together, and then make a presentable video that is somewhat enjoyable to watch. With that being said, I want to thank those of you who have subscribed. I would ask if you're new to the channel and you're just finding this video and you find the content informative or helpful or what have you, enjoyable, consider subscribing. I am a professional gunsmith, and so I'm trying to give people a kind of a sneak peek or an inside look at what it is that I do for a living. We talk a little bit about the money of it. We talk a little bit about the tools of the trade and how to get into the trade, and just an overall gunsmithing channel. And if that's something you're interested in, I'd love to see your subscription. I have some content that is in editing. I'm going to take a couple of days and spend some time with the family for spring break. And so I will try to have some of that ready to release during the upcoming week. I make no guarantees that there will be anything worth watching, but you should see some content in the next couple of days. Thanks for hanging out.